Well, better late than never, right? So Captain Marvel tells the story of a Kree warrior named Veers who crash lands on Earth and realizes that she may have had a life there. She slowly starts to uncover these memories, and through meeting new people and learning new things, she comes to realize that a lot of things are not what they seem and starts to slowly uncover certain aspects of her past. Guys, I'm sorry that I'm getting this review out so late. I did see the movie opening night. It was a late opening night, so I didn't get around to reviewing it that night and had a crazy busy weekend. So I'm here now. Let's do it. So starting right off with the positives, I'm going to go with the opening scene. Now, a lot of people complained about the first act in general being slow and kind of clunky, and I can't necessarily disagree with that, but I think the very opening scene, about the first 15 minutes or so, is really cool and actually got me hooked on the movie right away. It's kind of more of this sci-fi aspect of Veers and her crew of Kree warriors trying to find some scrolls so that they can win this war that they're having with them. And it was really interesting. Got me intrigued right away. And I gotta say that I started buying the character of Captain Marvel, at least Brie Larson's performance, right away a little better than I would have expected. She's had a little more personality pretty much right when the movie started as opposed to what we saw in the trailer. So that's a plus there. As the movie goes on, it's a little iffy, but I'll get to that later. Something that I really enjoyed about this movie are the Skrulls. I didn't know much about the Skrulls going into this movie. In fact, I didn't know anything about them. All I know is they're these alien species that can shape shift into people, and that their Skrulls are the bad guys, as Samuel Jackson said in the trailer. So that's really all I knew. Nothing else. And they did a really good job with the Skrulls overall in this movie. I'm not going to get into too much details because that would kind of spoil it for you guys. But yeah, the Skrulls, I really enjoyed what they did with them, and they kind of added some nuance and backstory that I didn't necessarily expect, and there was just a lot more to these characters as opposed to just really evil race of beings. Nick Fury. What can I say about Nick Fury? The guy is awesome. In this movie, it's a much different Nick Fury than we're used to seeing in, Avengers and Winter Soldier and all that stuff. The older Nick Fury in the movies we see is more jaded and kind of closed off, and he's seen everything. He's a man who's seen everything. He knows all. And this Nick Fury in this movie is a lot younger. He's kind of more green. He doesn't really know about what's out there. Carol Danvers is his first encounter with, or I guess her name was still Veers at the time, but still first encounter with something that isn't from Earth. So it's kind of surprising to him, even though it just kind of brushes over it. This is really the first time we see Nick Fury kind of start to realize what is really going on, and he has a decent arc throughout this movie. He starts off as just a regular agent, basically. He's not even a director of S.H.I.E.L.D. yet. He's working for someone else, and by the time it's over, we basically have the Nick Fury that we know and love. Speaking of Nick Fury, the de-aging technology they did in this movie is flawless. It looked a lot better on him than it did with Coulson. I'll admit, Coulson looked pretty good, but it was a little bit weird that you could tell it wasn't real. Samuel Jackson, Nick Fury in this movie looked 100% real. There was no uncanny valley. He looked basically like you pulled Samuel Jackson straight out of the 90s. Now, granted, it's not that hard to do because the guy still looks amazing today for whatever fucking 70 years old he is. So I imagine it wasn't super hard to make him look 20 years younger, but nonetheless, they did it so perfectly, it literally looks exactly like Samuel Jackson did in the 90s. So kudos to them for that. Marvel has done a really good job with the de-aging stuff, but this is the best it's ever been. No uncanny valley whatsoever. Flawless with the way that they did that with that character. I also got to mention Ben Mendelsohn. God damn, he is good in this movie. I did not expect this at all until I started hearing a bunch of people raving about Ben Mendelsohn's character. I'm like, really? That's interesting, because I kind of figured he was just going to play the normal Ben Mendelsohn villain, that he played in Rogue One, and it's kind of similar to what he played in The Dark Knight Rises, Ready Player One, all that stuff. He plays the same character for the most part, even though he's a really good actor. So I kind of felt that they would do the same thing in this movie, but that was not the case at all. This character, like the Skrulls in general, had a lot more to him than I expected, and Ben Mendelsohn absolutely killed it. He was by far the surprise standout of this movie. I also enjoyed some of the twists and turns in this movie. There's kind of the big one, and it's kind of a double twist. I can't explain it. Once you see the movie, or if you've seen the movie, you'll know what I'm talking about. But the first twist I saw coming from a mile away. The second one was actually very surprising to me. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I like where they're going with that, and the way that they executed it, I think, worked really well. So even though some of the twists I kind of saw coming, the execution was pretty damn good, and I liked it. I really did. I did not expect there to be that certain second part of the twist that they did in this movie, and they pulled it off. And the last positive I have for this movie is the humor. I actually, for the most part, really enjoyed the humor in this movie. Sometimes the MCU can go a little over the top with the humor, and sometimes they land, sometimes they don't. And there were definitely a few in this movie that fell flat, but I think the humor, for the most part, in this movie landed pretty well, and that was a bit surprising to me, and it was definitely a plus. Now, Brie Larson, Captain Marvel herself. How is she? She's okay. The portrayal it's fine. I feel like it was more about the writing that kind of made her as boring as she is. She has a little bit more personality in the movie than she did in the trailer. She's kind of snarky and sassy and funny at times, which is, I didn't get that from the trailers at all, so that was a plus, but I feel like that's just kind of Brie Larson's personality coming out onto the screen, because she's really like that in real life. She does a really good job with the sarcastic, funny moments. However, she struggled big time with the more serious, angry moments. There's a specific scene, it's not a spoiler at all, where she says something along the lines of, "I don't even know what I am," and it just lands so badly, and she, through a decent portion of this movie, she's quite dull. And I'm not sure, again, she's a good actress. I really liked her character in 21 Jump Street, and she was fine in this movie. I feel like a lot of it was due to the writing. I'm really looking forward to see what the Russos do with her in Endgame. So I really think that she can shine in a group setting, so hopefully that's what happens. Now, I've heard a lot of people complain about the 90s references in this movie and how they are constantly beating you over the head with it, with the songs and the clothing and the stores and just so much placement of stuff that is from the 90s to give people that nostalgic feeling. It didn't bother me as much as it did for most people, probably because I was born in 96, so I don't really remember much of the 90s. So maybe that's part of it. I just don't, it just didn't quite register with me, all the references they're making to the 90s. So I can completely understand why other people were bothered by it. I'm just saying it didn't really affect me one way or the other. And the other thing that's kind of just in the middle is Jude Law's character. He's a character that is the trainer of Veers, Carol Danvers, Captain Marvel, all the different names she has, but he trains her, and he's kind of the leader of that little group, that little Kree strike force. I can't remember the name of it right now. I'm sorry. I'm sure I'm going to be like, oh, of course, when I hear it. But that team that they have, he's kind of the leader of it, and he trained Carol, and they have some nice interactions with each other at the beginning, but overall there just isn't a ton to his character, and he's just kind of bland, especially when you compare him to like Ben Mendelsohn. Now on to the negatives, and the first one that comes to mind is the final fight. To me was very underwhelming and just kind of anticlimactic. They wrapped it up so quickly, and there's really no stakes or intensity whatsoever. I feel like this isn't even a spoiler, so I'm going to say it. She's just kicking so much ass that there isn't really much to it, and you're just kind of, okay, yeah, this is super easy, and there's really not much going on there, and then it just kind of ends abruptly, and it just leaves me a little bit unsatisfied. This movie also suffers from what I call the solo problem, and that is a solo Star Wars story, if you don't know what I'm talking about. That's when you when they give us answers to questions that we didn't ask. There are certain things this movie does that connect to future things in the MCU, and it's just something that I didn't want to know. I'm not going to into specifics at all, but there's basically things that they did that affect the future of the MCU. Now we look back on it, oh, so that's how that happened, and that's why that happened, and we just answers we did not need, just like they did in the solo Star Wars story. I wish some of that stuff they should have just kept a mystery and kept us wondering, because no answer they would have given us could have possibly been satisfying enough. I also felt like the movie lacked a clear direction at times, and it doesn't exactly know where it was always going. It's not a very streamlined story. They're kind of just it doesn't really feel like it's too much of a narrative at all, aside from the fact that Carol is learning her past. There's just kind of things that happen, and then another thing happens, and then this happens, and then it's over. It just doesn't quite feel like they exactly knew what they were doing with this movie and where they were going throughout the whole process of it. And part of that is probably because there's like 5 writers on this movie. That feels like a little bit too much, because you can feel that some things were maybe written or directed by one person, some things were maybe written or directed by someone else, and it's just too many different ideas and just so many different things going on meshed into one movie. It doesn't always feel like it's one cohesive narrative. There's also a minor problem I have with Carol herself, and just kind of the way her character is and her relationships with characters, especially the one from her past, her fellow pilot. It's just kind of odd the way they did that, because they're constantly telling her to suppress her emotions and act rationally, and it doesn't seem like she has that much emotion throughout the movie. There's a lot of problems with telling us instead of showing us in this movie, and there's people telling her, oh, you are such a great person, you're the best person I know. Why don't you show us that instead of having someone tell us? There's too much that they say about her character that Brie Larson's performance or the direction they took, just either way, the character of Captain Marvel did not seem to convey at all. So it was just really odd how that all kind of worked. Ronan, let's talk about Ronan. Did Ronan really have to be there? No, I don't think so. It kind of felt like they just kind of shoehorned him in so people can be like, oh, I remember Ronan from Guardians of the Galaxy. Ronan in this movie here's what I'll compare it to. He has basically Darth Vader's role in Rogue One, minus the badass scene killing a bunch of people. So, in that sense, he's pretty much useless. Even though it was cool to see him in there, there's really no reason to have him in this movie. So overall, guys, I would compare this to a Phase 1 MCU movie. To, say, Thor or Captain America the First Avenger, kind of when they were still finding their footing with these origin stories. Still hadn't quite figured out these characters, still hadn't quite figured out what they were doing with the franchise and how exactly they were going to do the tones and everything of this movie. And I would even compare Captain Marvel kind of to Thor at first, because if you just watch the first Thor movie, he's not very interesting at all. He's just kind of dull, to be honest, similar to Captain Marvel. So I'm hoping the same thing that happened with Thor is that she will get a lot better when she's put in this group of people that we know so well and gets to interact with them and gets written and directed by some of the best people in the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe. So I think the future of her character it's fine. I'm not worried about it. Alright, I'm going to address the huge elephant in the room. There has been some huge, major controversy surrounding this movie, and it's about things that Brie Larson said and about this movie being a feminist propaganda piece, and honestly, pretty much similar to everything else, both sides kind of pissed me off. So I'm just pushing everyone away, and I'm just going into this movie and judging it based on its own merits of the film itself. That's what you should do. That's what I should do, and I always do. That's what everyone should do. Just completely forget about all that other shit, because it doesn't matter. Judge the movie based on the movie and nothing else. Because there's so much stupid shit from both sides. You got people who are thinking it's the best movie ever just because it's a female-led movie, and they're like, oh, we need to give this movie a 10 out of 10 just to piss off the other side. And you got the other side who hate it because they think it's a feminist propaganda piece or whatever, and they're, oh, we got to give this movie a 0 out of 10 just to piss off the other side. It's just, it goes nowhere, and it's absolutely pointless, and the whole thing was so stupid. I tried to ignore it the best I could, and I did a pretty good job of it. Went into this movie with an open mind and ended up liking it a lot more than I thought. Is this movie a feminist movie? I mean, yeah, kinda. It has a female lead. There are some strong female characters in it, but it's I don't think it really affects the overall movie. There are really only a few lines in it that are kind of made me think, oh, that's, yeah, it's a little bit into the stuff that people were saying it would be, but it's so quick and so subtle that it doesn't bother me, to be honest. It's good. I like it. I don't love it. It's definitely in the bottom half of the MCU, but all I'm saying is, guys, all that stuff that a lot of people were worried about is not really a factor at all. It's just a Marvel superhero movie with a female lead, and there's just a little bit of that stuff, but it doesn't bother me whatsoever. I enjoyed the movie, and it has a lot of issues, for sure. That's why I'd say it's very similar to a Phase 1 MCU movie, and I'm looking forward to see what they do with the character here on out. That being said, I'm going to give Captain Marvel a 6.5 out of 10. So there you have it, guys. Have you seen Captain Marvel yet? If so, what do you think? Leave a comment below, and if you're new here, go ahead and subscribe. If you like my content, hit the notification bell so you get notified when I post a video. Spread the word, and I will see you soon.